In this particular chapter, we're not going to learn any new syntax or constructions for adjectives. So, what we learned in chapter 26 still applies here. The focus on chapter 27 for Wheelock is just on forms. There are alternate ways to form certain comparative and superlative adjectives. And so we learn about those. But how you actually use them in clauses is going to be the same as what we've already learned. So let's look at number one here, the superlatives of some adjectives ending in lis. There are many adjectives in Latin that end with lis in the positive form. Remember, the positive form is the basic form, the lexical form of the adjective. And these adjectives that end with lis, the vast majority of them, have regular comparatives and superlatives. I'll just give you one example. Fidelis and fidele for faithful form their comparative by taking the stem or the base, fidel, right? Adding ior and es for masculine, feminine, or neuter here. And we get more faithful, fidelior, fidelius. And simply by taking fidel and adding issimus and its other gender forms for most faithful. So typically that's what we're going to expect with these adjectives that end with lis. Okay, but there are six, and it's important to know these six. There are six that form their superlatives differently. We're going to add not issimus, but just limmus, limma, and limmum for the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms. And we're going to add those to the base. All right? So I just give you two examples here and then list the other four. So we have facilis, which is easy. Neuter is facile. And then facilior and facilius are both normal. We're taking facil, adding ior and ius. Okay, but it's the superlative that's the place where it's unusual. We're just adding limus to facil. So facilimus, facilima, facillimum. All right, for easiest. And then I have similus and simile for like. Similior and similius, more like, is the comparative. That's normal. But the superlative is not similissimus, but simply simillimus. Simillimus. So most like. All right. So the other four lis adjectives that follow this rather unusual pattern are difficulus for difficult, dissimilus for dissimilar, graculus for slender or thin, and humilis for lower or humble. Excuse me. Now, number two, there are also comparatives and superlatives of adjectives ending in er that we have to consider. Now, with these types of adjectives, you've met some er adjectives here in the Wheelock chapters. The comparatives are normal. And so let's just remind ourselves what happens with normal comparatives. We take the if the masculine lexical form of an adjective ends in er from any declension, you form the comparative normally by taking the base or the stem of the positive form of the adjective, and then adding eor for masculine, feminine, and eus for neuter. And then for both sets, all the genders, the genitive is eoris. All right. Now, don't forget, and this is what's important to remember, that sometimes the e of the er on the masculine is part of the stem, and sometimes it's been added for the masculine form to break up a consonant cluster. So how will you know whether the e of the er ending on the masculine singular is part of the real stem or not? You know by looking at the feminine and neuter forms. So I'm laying this out a little bit different than Wheelock just to help you get that across and to remember. Okay, so in this first column, what I do is just specify what the declension pattern is, and then whether the e is actually part of the stem or not. So for our 2-1-2 type of adjectives, this is second, first, second declension for masculine, feminine, neuter. When the e is part of the stem, you can tell by looking at the other genders. So liber for free is the masculine singular nominative form. We have for the feminine singular libera, and the neuter singular liberum. All right, so notice that the e is not only present here, but it's present in the feminine and the neuter forms as well. So that E is part of the stem. And so when I form the comparative, I take the stem with the E, liber, and then I just add the eor and es to it. So liberior and liberius. Okay, so now on the second line, I have 2 1 2s, but no on whether the E is part of the stem. Now again, how do I know that? Take a look at pulcher. Here's the E in the masculine, but in the feminine form, it's not pulchera, but rather pulcra, and neuter pulcrum. So the E has been added to break up the consonant cluster at the end if the E hadn't been there. So the E is not real in terms of the stem. And so I'm going to take pulcr without the E because the E is not really part of the stem. And then I just add eor and es to it. So pulcrior and pulcrius for more beautiful. And then for this third line, I have 3 3 3. That is, the masculine, feminine, and neuter forms are third declension, and E is not part of the stem. And acer, acris, and acre, keen, are the nominative forms of the three genders. Notice that the E is here in the masculine, but lacking between the C and the R in the feminine and neuter. That tells you that the E has been added. It's what's sometimes described as an epenthetic E, epenthetic, right? It's been placed upon or inside the form to break up that cluster of consonants there. So I take acer, right? Not acer, acer, and then I add eor and es, acrior, acrius for keener. Now, with these types of ER adjectives, the superlatives are irregular in 2 ways. Number 1, to form the superlative of an ER adjective, use the masculine form ending in ER, not the base or stem. So here it doesn't matter whether E is really part of the base or stem or not. We're going to use ER irregardless. And then secondly, instead of adding issimus, we're going to add rimus, rimma, rimmum to the ER. So here are examples again. And I've given you the positive and the comparative here, liber, liberior, and then we have liber, right? We're taking the ER form, liber, and then adding rimus. So I'm going to end up with 2 R's here when all is said and done. Liberimus for freest, pulcher, comparative is pulcrior. Remember, the E is not part of the stem. We for the comparative, do this normally by using only the stem, but with the superlative, we always take the ER form from the masculine, pulcher, and then we add rimus, pulcherimus, pulcherimus, most beautiful. And then acer, comparative is acrior, but for the superlative, we use the ER form, acerimus, for keenest, and it's different genders there. All right, now, number 3. There are some especially irregular comparative and superlative adjectives. And the good news is that these are common words. And so even if they're a little bit harder to remember up front as you see them in Latin literature, they are common adjectives, and therefore you will get used to them. But it is hard to recognize them. And one of the reasons is that many of these types of adjectives have suppletive forms. Now, you may not remember us using that word before in the past, but the concept of suppletion is that a lexical item, a word, uses a different stem. It borrows a completely different stem to create part of its paradigm. So in English, we have suppletion or forms that are suppletive in a verb like to go, where the past is went, right? And went and go are not related to each other in terms of actual base or stem. And then for our adjective for good, we have good, comparative better, superlative best. You can see that better and best are related to each other, but they're not related etymologically to good. Good comes from a different root or stem. All right. So what you need to do is to memorize the basic forms below. And when I say the basic forms, I basically mean the masculine singular form and the nominative. If you've got those, then you can identify the feminine and the neuter. And if you know your morphology for comparatives, when you see eor, then you'll know that the neuter is es, right? And then superlatives, these follow the 2 1 2 pattern, whereas comparatives are 3 3s. They're following third declension. Okay, so let me just read through these real quickly with you. And again, keep your eye open for these as you see them in your reading, and be working on memorizing these forms, these basic forms. So you already know many of the ones on the left. So bonus for good, the comparative melior, melius for better, and optimus, and its other genders optima, optimum for best. If you know the word to ameliorate is to improve or make better. That's using that root there. Next, we have magnus for great, major, and maius for greater. And if you remember, the I shows up in English writing as a J for our roots, then you can think of the word major as related to this. And then maximus for greatest. Malus for bad, peor for worse, and peius for the neuter form. And if you know Spanish, the word peor in Spanish is worse. Okay, and then we have a pessimist for worst, and you might recall that a pessimist who always assumes the worst about situations. Pessimist, worst. Okay, now over here, multus for much. Okay, there's not a masculine or feminine form, but the neuter is plus, at least for singular here, and then plurimus for a most. Parvus, small, minor, and minus for smaller, and then minimus for smallest. And a lot of these have are Latin roots in English, so this hopefully is ringing some bells with you for words you know in English. All right, we have the forms pri and pro, which have the sense of in front of or before. The comparative prior, prius for former, and then primus for first. And then we have superus, that above, superior, superius for higher, and then two possibilities for the superlative for these, summus for the highest or the furthest, and supremus for the highest or the last. Now, technically, the forms pri and pro are not positive adjectives, all right? So you won't see them with different case, gender, number forms, but they are related to the comparative adjectives that we see here and here, the comparative and superlatives. And so that's why Wheelock gives those to you in the chart. Now, the last thing I want to say here is something about the declension of plus, more. When the comparative plus is singular, it occurs only in the neuter form. So in the singular, you won't see masculine, feminine forms, just neuter. And when it's neuter and singular, it only functions substantively. That is, it functions as a noun. And then if we want to specify what there is more of, then we use a genitive of the whole following. So plus pecuniae is literally more of, genitive, money, okay? But you could translate that as more money. Okay? You don't necessarily need to use the of. It sounds awkward in English. Now, with 4.2, when the comparative plus is plural, not singular, it does function as a normal adjective and occurs in masculine, feminine, neuter. As a normal adjective, it's going to agree in case, gender, number with the noun if it's an attributive adjective. However, its form is unusual here as a mixture of I stem and consonant stems. Where it looks I stem or behaves in an I stem way is in the genitive plural only. Everywhere else, it looks like a typical consonant stem third declension, meaning whereas normally I stems affect not just genitive plural, but in the neuter plural, nominative and accusative, usually you have ia for I stems. We're just going to have ah instead. Okay, so let's look at our forms here. So again, in the singular, only neuter occurs, no masculine, feminine, and it's functioning substantively. Plus for nominative, genitive, pluris. For the accusative, plus. Notice neuters are the same here in these forms, right? And then ablative plure, so very normal ablative third declension. Now for the masculine feminine plural, we have plures, plurium, pluribus, plures, pluribus. Okay, now notice that this is the only place the I shows up on this masculine feminine side, and that's because in the genitive plural it behaves like an I stem. Now, on the neuter side, I stems also would normally get an I here, but notice it's not I stem anywhere except genitive, and that's why I've highlighted it here for you as well, just to note the differences. Okay, so for neuter plural, plura, genitive plural, plurium, dative plural, pluribus, accusative plural, plura, again, back to the same as the nominative as neuters do, and then ablative plural, pluribus. So there are your irregular comparative and superlatives.